Ladies and gentlemen, friends and fellow travelers, welcome to this panel today. I'd like to thank our speakers. I'm very excited. We have Angela Bulloch, Rodney Graham, Ragnar Kjartansson, Ari Benjamin Meyers, and Jim Shaw with us today to talk about this whole idea of art and music. They all are or have been, besides their very distinguished art practice, also members of bands. And we're going to discuss this, and obviously, we'll, as always with these panels, then open it to the floor.
I always wanted to spend more time doing music, but I kind of left it through all of the 80s and didn't really do anything. It was the odd project with a friend, but and then I guess the first instance of use of music in my work would be this work Parsifal that I did in the 90s, which was a manipulation of some bars of Wagner's opera to extend it into turn it into take this already quite long opera and make it almost infinitely long. Sometimes I find playing the kind of music I play doesn't sound very good in museum and gallery context because the acoustics are different. It just sounds better in a club or in a... Also, it's nice to play to people who are a little bit drunk, I have to say, you know. Anyway.
Now, to come back to the Xenaki thing, when he said, you know, how can we bring music into exhibition? Yeah. That's obviously something which plays a big role for you. Your show actually, I think for the ICA in Boston is called Song, and that's going to tour then to the Carnegie. The exhibition you have at the moment at the Migros Museum for Gegenwartskunst has also to do with music. So does actually your project you did for Performer in New York, Bliss, and so did obviously also your 2009 Venice Biennale Pavilion, The End. So I was just wondering if you can talk a little bit how it started that you then brought this musical practice into your shows.
Yeah, it used to be, at first it was, you know, art and music, and you do your art, and then it was do your art during the day, and then in the evening you go to band rehearsal. But slowly, I discovered that it was much more comfortable to work with music in the art context, rather than try to make an album, because it's like such a limited, like the form of pop music is such a limited form. It's basically an album and concerts. But if you call it like art world pop, then you can do kind of whatever you want to, like create films or do installations with it, or so it ended up like that the whole musical thing just went into the art, because, and also somehow it felt more authentic, because when I was making music as music, I always felt I was kind of pretending to do a song. It's like, you know, but then when it became an art piece, it was like so pretentious that it just went full circle and became authentic.
I mean, I guess for me, the epiphany was the other way around, because I was always doing music. I mean, my father was a musician, there was a piano in the house, so I had a very classical, you know, the typical thing, like started playing piano when I was 4, and then, you know, then I got bored when I was a bit older, practicing all the time, so I started to compose because I was bored, sort of play. And then I was composing more, and then when you start to compose and you're young, no one wants to play your music, so you have to start to, you know, learn to conduct so you can actually get people together to play your music. So I had this very sort of classical, sort of the classical trifecta, like piano, composing, conducting, and I had met, you know, I was lucky I met Leonard Bernstein, and I worked with him, and he really, it was like quite a big thing for me to meet him and work with him, and I came to Germany actually. When I came to Germany 12 or 13 years ago as an opera conductor, so it was really like the most classical thing imaginable, and I'd worked at the Bavarian State Opera, and I guess with opera was always this interest, because opera is still this thing that brings everything together. I mean, that's why, you know, also Il Tempo is so interesting. I mean, opera is still this combination, the original combination of music, stage, visual, sound, performance, dance. You know, opera really is this kind of Gesamtkunstwerk, to use the Wagner term. And but you know, the opera world is very, how to say, it's a kind of conservative place. You know, they They kind of like to do things a certain way. They're very good at doing certain things. Over the last 350 years, they've gotten very good at, but they're not very good at doing other things. And so I was slowly getting more and more interested in doing other things. And I started to find out that these houses, like opera houses or theaters or even concert halls, are very good for a specific thing. But once you try to break that, it all kind of, the whole business, the whole modality of working totally breaks down. And so I had sort of went more and more in a direction of kind of experimental music theater. As a composer, that was something I liked to do. I always thought it was very interesting to kind of, you know, give an audience, for instance, a kind of, you know, if you give them something beautiful, but then you take it away, I always thought was kind of a very a thing that I like to do. It's maybe a bit cruel, but you know, it's a good way to kind of have an audience, you know, give them, but then sabotage it. So I think, again, where I'm coming from, this idea of sabotage, I think is very important. I think it's actually quite necessary. I think it would do a tremendous amount of good if concerts could go back to being a much more, you know, if we didn't care so much about the wrong note or about he didn't hit that high note, and just let them be kind of spontaneous performances.
Before we talk about the way you bring also music into exhibitions, I wanted to ask you to tell us about the band and how Destroy All Monsters happened. What was the Epiphany?
Well, I had graduated from undergraduate, and I was a painter, and I realized that being a painter was kind of a dead thing. And it seemed like being in a band would be the thing to do. And in Ann Arbor, there wasn't anybody doing anything like the Stooges anymore. They were from Ann Arbor, but it was all sort of roots rock stuff. So that seemed like a good thing to do. Mike was still in school, and you know, he wanted to be a drummer. He had a distinct interest in drone music. I could have, if I had any talent, maybe gone in the direction of prog rock, but without talent, I was reduced to playing, you know, noise guitar and things like that. And he was friends with Niagara, who had briefly gone to U of M. Her boyfriend was Carrie Lauren at the time. So we just started playing. It sort of evolved into the Niagara stuff occurred separate from the Mike and I stuff, because she just wasn't interested in that stuff. And then after Mike and I went off to graduate school, Carrie had a bit of a breakdown, and he started playing with the Miller brothers, and then they started working with Ron Ashton as a proper rock and roll band. But Destroy All Monsters, before that, we played 3 gigs maximum, of which we lasted maybe 15 minutes per gig. You know, people would just leave the room. I think our first song was a cover of Iron Man, and I only knew like one verse of it. But we were sort of more the idea of a band. But even when we reformed later, the stuff that we would record while practicing was always better and more interesting than the stuff we'd do on stage.
I just did a piece recently that was designed as a headphone mix of a piece that was a sound installation, but that's limiting as well. You don't want to have a bunch of people sitting around listening to headphones. You know, that can be not very exciting.
But if you do it in a theater situation or a night, that's.
I'm just thinking about the
gallery version,
gallery context or museum context.
I kind of think of this Gesamtkunstwerke. I mean, it's really a way that you can approach making an exhibition. So it's really not about one piece or something. It's really about how you combine together, like it's more like a curatorial act, like how you bring together all different sorts of elements, you know, like an exhibition. That's one work, you know, of all the things. So, yeah, I don't know how that really works as a group exhibition, but I certainly consider making exhibitions of my own work in that kind of way. Like, but, you know, that includes, you know, seeing maybe the backstage kind of side of things as well as, you know, like the other side of the fourth wall, or, you know. So that's kind of how you see around the edge of something.
I would like to thank Angela, Rodney, Ragnar, Ari, and Jim so very, very much. I'd like to thank Marc Spiegler, Annette Schönholzer, Claudio Vogt, Michael Kuse, and of course all of you for being here. Thanks a lot. Thank you.